Okay, so let's start and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Mary Whenman. I'm Senior Director of Communications at the British Business Bank, the UK's Economic Development Bank, and I will be chairing today's panel. This year, the PRCA is aligning with the UN Women's official theme for International Women's Day 2025 for all women and girls' rights, equality, empowerment. As PR and public affairs professionals, we have a unique platform to shape narratives, influence policy, and drive meaningful change for gender equality. In this webinar, we'll explore how strategic communication can amplify underrepresented voices, challenge bias, and advocate for policies that support women's rights. We're going to hear from 4 industry experts on how public relations and public affairs can be powerful tools for progress and how you can make an impact in your work. First, a bit about me. I'm former president of Women in PR and I'm a member of the PRCA's Equality, Inclusion and Advisory Board. I've also worked with BME PR Pros since 2018, supporting initiatives like the Blueprint and the Exec Leadership Programme. And in 2023, I participated in the Taylor Bennett Foundation Reverse Mentoring Programme. Now I would like to introduce our expert panel. First, Angela Balakrishnan is Executive Director for Communications and Public Affairs at the Information Commissioner's Office, the UK's data protection regulator. Her award-winning teams help people understand their privacy and freedom of information rights. But more than that, they use communications to help people to care, to take steps to protect their information, and to see why their rights are so important. I'm sure we'll have a very interesting discussion today looking at this morning's headlines, Angela. Angela co-chairs the UK Regulators Communications Network, is a member of the Women in PR Committee and is on the board of the Asian Communications Network. Our second panellist is Heather Blundell. Heather is the UK CEO of Grayling and has spent over 15 years advising some of the world's largest companies and brands in the UK and internationally. She's a trusted advisor to top UK business leaders navigating periods of significant change, and she is a leading media expert. Heather is a passionate advocate of diversity, equity and inclusion and has made this one of Grayling's top business priorities, where it is embedded throughout Grayling's culture and work. The agency has entered into partnerships with Creative Access, the Global Purpose Enterprise Group and Tommy's Pregnancy Loss Charity. Our third panellist is Whitney Simon. Whitney is the founder of Anchor and Flow, a diversity, equity and inclusion training and advisory consultancy. She's a member of the PRCA's Race and Ethnicity Equity Board and a member of Women in PR. Whitney has also recently participated in the Taylor Bennett Foundation CIPR Reverse Mentoring Scheme, a programme aimed at providing non-diverse executive leaders the opportunity to be mentored and learn about ethnic minority lived experiences, challenges and solutions for the future of the workplace with an ethnically diverse mid to senior mentor. And being someone who's participated on that programme, I can highly recommend it. So please do check that out after this webinar. Finally, Lizzie Tomlin. Lizzie is partner and head of UK Public Affairs at the Public Affairs Agency, H Advisors Cicero. In January, Lizzie was elected chair of Women in Public Affairs, which provides a forum for over 2,500 women at all stages of their career to meet and network together. Women in Public Affairs publishes an annual survey which consistently highlights how important pay transparency is for women, which is why they launched a pay and progression toolkit last year. So to conclude, before going into questions, far from rolling back on DE&I, we will have lots to talk about today. We have 5 key themes we will be covering, including female leadership in the workplace, intersectionality, the challenge facing women in public affairs, excuse me, bringing about policy change and pay transparency. We'll also ensure we have plenty of time to go to the audience for questions, and we will go at the end of each of those 5 themes and also at the end of the webinar. So first of all, I'm going to kick off with the same question to each of our panelists to get the webinar going. And I'm going to go to Angela first with the question, what challenges do you face as a senior leader in business?
Thanks, Mary. Great to join a fabulous panel's lineup today. So I'm going to talk about 3 things. I think firstly, one of the challenges is around our identities and who we are as female leaders in the workplace. We are the too much women, right? We're expected to get it just right. So we're either too quiet or we're too loud and opinionated. We're either lacking in gravitas or we're too big for our boots. We're either too honest and too open in sharing, too friendly and emotional, or we're too demanding, too serious, too cold. We are everything and we are nothing. And when you layer that on other aspects of diversity like race and age and socioeconomic background, it's an absolute minefield to navigate who we can be. Alongside that, there's the practical part. So many women I know are running on empty. Research shows time and again that women do carry more of the mental load, more of the domestic load, whether that's caring responsibilities or other life responsibilities. And Women in PR research shows that 2/3 of senior women have considered quitting their job because of burnout, with only 3% actually managing to completely switch off at the end of the day. We're trying to live up to this fake ideal of having it all in a society that isn't really geared up to properly support women, and that has a level playing field for us. And I think you can really see that when it comes to representation in senior leadership roles in the comms and PR industry. There isn't enough of us in those roles, despite the fact that we make up 2/3 of this industry, but half of us are in these senior leadership roles. And it's a really lonely place when you're carving out a path and fighting against a workplace culture that wasn't designed with women in mind. And when you think about ethnically diverse women in those senior roles, that figure plummets even further. So put it simply, there aren't many people that look like me in those senior leadership roles, and that absolutely needs to change.
Thank you, Angela. And I love that phrase, the too much women. I think you've definitely got a blog in there. Moving to Heather for the same question on the challenges that you face as a senior female leader in business.
Angela has answered that so beautifully. I feel I agree with absolutely everything that she has said. I think the biggest challenge I have always faced and continue to face is when it can feel quite lonely and isolating, and trying to get the balance between being totally accountable for the business, responsible for the business, and I take that very seriously. I know that the buck stops with me in the UK, but also showing some vulnerability and sharing that accountability and allowing people to support you, and sometimes getting that sort of judgment is quite difficult. And so I'm continuing to work on that, although I do think as I've become older and possibly more sort of, I guess, secure in my leadership roles, I have found it easier to ask for help and to show vulnerability. But I think we probably put ourselves under a lot of pressure to have all of the answers and to be able to fix everything. And then, as Angela said, in terms of caring responsibilities, I have 2 young children who bring me a huge amount of joy, but are, of course, as anyone knows, with children of any stage. In fact, I keep getting told that it's going to get harder and more time consuming because they're not going to go to bed at 7 p.m. They'll go to bed at 9 p.m. and have a lot more homework than they do now. But I think it's the mental, the mental load, even if you do have, a partnership or support in terms of the care of those children, the kind of World Book Day and reading and everything else often does fall to women. And we also like that to be, I like feeling like that, and I like having that responsibility towards my children as well. I certainly don't want to offload that. So yeah, I think, just building on what Angela said, I do think there are lots of challenges, but also lots of opportunities for women as business leaders, and some of the best leaders and best people, you know, that I work with and report into are women, and truly sort of paving the way forward. So I do feel, you know, optimistic in the role as well.
Thank you. And I'm sure that that's something that resonates with everyone on the panel, and probably many people listening, that the more senior you get, the lonelier it gets, and it can be isolating at times. Coming to you now, Whitney, in terms of the challenges that you faced as a senior female leader.
Yeah, I think Angela and Heather have spoken to a lot of similar themes. I think one of the things that Angela spoke on that I think really resonates with me is not only being the only, so feeling that isolation, but being the only when you think about kind of race, sexual orientation. I think the more diverse backgrounds that you add, the more isolating it is, because it is difficult to see someone who looks like me, who has gone through similar experiences. And, you know, I think representation, people say it, but it's only when you're in a space where you feel seen and you feel heard and you feel as though there's others who've experienced similar things that you recognize just how powerful and impactful it is. I think another thing kind of leading into that is being taken seriously. I think a lot of the time when I work with other senior women, we get, you know, oh, you look so young for your age, or, oh, you know, like, have you done this? And, you know, like being mistaken for an intern or something like that. And so there is this expectation that in order, you know, in order for a woman to be taken seriously, it feels like we have to overextend ourselves. It feels as though we have to prove ourselves twice as much, you know, 3 times as much as other men in the room. And so that can be really, really difficult. And then I think probably the third bit, and it kind of feeds into all of that, is just feeling as though when you are a woman in a senior leadership role, you have to conform to certain expectations. Angela put it so perfectly. You have to be kind, but you can't be a pushover. You have to be assertive, but you can't be aggressive. And those kind of like the parameters that women have to conform to, they just get even more suffocating as you add in different layers. So race, sexual orientation, ability, even thinking about if you don't want to have a child. I think a lot of the times as a senior, you know, female leader, I hear a lot about like, oh, so when are you going to start a family? All these other things. And it's like, there's a lot of women who, one, can't have a family, or two, who don't want to have a family. And despite the fact that women are expected to be, you know, they can't be too emotional, they have to be pragmatic, there's a lot of kind of, you know, shade towards women who don't want to conform to that role or kind of fall into that, I want to, you know, start a family, do things like that. And so it can just feel like a landmine, really, in terms of how to be the right woman to fit into a senior business leader role.
Thank you, Whitney. And you raised a lot of really interesting points, and we'll be coming on to discuss some of those and intersectionality in particular later in the webinar. Finally, going to you, Lizzie, for the challenges that you face as a female senior leader.
Thanks, Mary. And I think, yeah, the other panelists, you've summed it up very well, the challenges that we're facing as senior women in business. But just to sum it up, for me, it is the lack of senior role models, senior female role models, and particularly to learn management styles from. I've worked with some fantastic women in the industry, which has been a pleasure to work with, but sometimes they are few and far between. And women often say they have to act perhaps more aggressively or a bit more unnatural to match those male management leadership styles that they're around. And it's just not as comfortable for them. So the more role models we have of senior women in leadership roles, the more management styles that people can work underneath, but also you can learn from and have that diverse leadership there as well.
Thanks, Lizzie, and some good points raised there. And we're going to come on later and just talk about the particular challenges that women face in public affairs that has been traditionally very male dominated. So just moving the discussion along and staying on the theme of female leadership in the workplace. Angela, could I come to you as to how can we as female leaders redefine what good leadership looks like?
Absolutely. So I think we need to rewrite what effective leadership looks like. And that does mean challenging some of these traditional standards of leadership, which have often been set by men, and advocating for some different traits. So leadership doesn't have to equate, for example, this idea of gravitas, doesn't have to equate with like dominance and steel and competition. We can be compassionate, we can be collaborative, we can listen, we can connect, we can lift others. But it's hard because I think we've just discussed, some of those traits are then seen as being too soft. Even vulnerability, which Heather mentioned, still showing vulnerability still feels like a risk, but it should be a strength. I remember talking at International Women's Day a couple of years ago and speaking very openly about the realities of juggling parenting and being a senior female leader. And I had some really positive feedback, but I also had a comment about, oh, I shouldn't talk too openly about my situation because it might undermine my gravitas. I mean, what does that even mean? There should be strength in admitting mistakes, around surrounding yourself with people who can challenge you, who can be smarter than you. That helps to build trust. It helps to build stronger teams. But it is hard because, we're trying to be two things at once. Don't be too empathetic, don't be too assertive. But I like this idea that multiple things can be true at the same time. So you can be empathetic and assertive. And I think one of the things that women do really well is we have emotional intelligence. We know how to deliver those messages in a way that will land, that will build trust. We can tell stories, we can connect on a personal level. I don't think we need to dilute our personalities to fit these outdated molds, but we do need more visible examples of female leadership because then it becomes harder to box people into these outdated stereotypes.
And just following up on that, Angela, how do you think workplace policies and practices can create an environment that empowers all women?
Um, But first and foremost, for me, flexible working is just a non-negotiable. I think, and that means flexibility in all its forms. We live in the digital world now, so, let's think about how people can work, where they can work, job shares, and everything that comes with true flexibility. One of the other things I think is really listening to your workforce and understanding what they need. So, listening to the females in your workforce, but also thinking about females from different backgrounds and different lived experiences. At the ICO, we have some brilliant staff networks who have really helped us understand where there have been gaps in our policies and procedures. And as a result, we've got some really good policies that we've developed. We've got a new menopause policy and associated training to make sure that we're bringing that conversation much more into the fore, helping managers and peers really understand how they can practically support women who are going through the menopause, and so they are, well supported to stay in their jobs and stay in their careers rather than drop out, which we know does happen. And that's a massive game changer. This is taking something that people were just having to deal with silently, and making sure that it is part and parcel of how we set up our workplaces to ensure that women are successful. The other thing I would say is data is really important because data helps you understand where there are gaps and where there are things that you need to address. So similarly, where we've had areas of our business that have had lower than the gender representation that we want, we've been able to take intentional steps to addressing that. So, changing the way we recruit, removing gender bias from our job ads, talking more openly about the workplace policies that we have in place to support women to really help bump up the representation in parts of our organisation where we want to do better.
Great, thank you, Angela. And just moving to you, Heather, we've just heard how some of the policies that Angela's introduced there. You've been in your role for over a year now, and what changes have you made to support women in your business at Grayling?
I hope quite a few. We've just overhauled all of our policies and benefits, and like Angela said, we have, I hope, really listened to the workforce, women and men and parents, and across the spectrum of our business, and we have 6 different ERG employee resource groups now, and one of them is the Women's Network. We also have a parenting network, and they have all fed into the different policies and benefit updates that we've made. So, we've extended our maternity leave policy to be 5 months full pay. We've extended our paternity leave as well to be 2 months full pay. We've introduced a fertility policy of at least 5 days fully paid to attend any appointments. We have a baby loss policy for both men and women, regardless of circumstance of how the baby was lost, and we have been really guided by partners in all of those and expertise to develop all of those policies as well. And to go back to your previous question as well, I think it's all well and good as having these policies, and we have a very flexible approach to work, and that's not just for leadership. In fact, I sometimes am concerned that it's only for people feel like it's only for leadership, and it has to be across the board. I come in work slightly later sometimes because I've dropped my boys off, and I know other people in the workforce will need to come in slightly later because their rail fare is a lot cheaper, and that's absolutely fine by me. People can start work at home and come in when the trains are quieter or it's more affordable. I definitely think trying to get our workforce to work less is my challenge, not getting them to work more. But I think people need to, we can have agencies with the best policies in the world, and we've all worked at those agencies where they've got all those great policies, but the culture doesn't support them. And that's what I think I've learned that my responsibility is, and I'm absolutely on a journey with this, but I'm trying to hold myself accountable to be much more honest about, where I need that flexibility. A brilliant example of that actually is about this webinar. Mary had organised a briefing call for us for this webinar, and I do one pickup every single week, and it's the only day I can manage to do a pickup. I can do a couple more drop-offs, but I only do pickups on a Friday, and I just try and protect that. And it's obviously my boys are little, and so it's early, and so I work around that. And I think maybe if that call had gone in at 3 o'clock about a year ago, I think I would have done it whilst I was on the pickup. So I would have been in the playground, I would have been coming on and off mute. It would have been awful for me, disruptive for everyone else. And I'm now trying to be more honest of, I just emailed Mary back immediately and said, actually, I picked my boys up that time. Is there any chance we could do a little bit earlier or a little bit later? And she, obviously, you said you completely understood and you had been in that position as well. And, I know that's a small move, but that, those moments are me trying to lead by example and being transparent about where I need that flexibility. And if I show people I need that flexibility, then others will also be transparent about where they need that flexibility. That's not me working any less. I probably worked until 6 that night in order to make up for it. But it's just about actually showing people that we are living and breathing those policies, rather than just saying, we're a flexible employer, or we've got these great family policies, but please don't use them.
Absolutely. And that sort of culture in the workplace is absolutely critical, which sort of brings us on to our next theme that we're going to be talking about, which is intersectionality. So I'm going to come to you, Whitney, on how we can take an intersectional approach to International Women's Day so that women from all backgrounds feel that they are supported in the workplace.
Yeah, really important question. I feel as though when thinking about, D&I as a whole, we've somehow gotten into a space where a lot of the times, we just think about these different groups as monoliths. So you think about women, all women are the same. You think about people of color, all people of color are the same. And I think that's where we really get into it, where the efforts or the initiatives that we put forward can come across as performative, because it's not speaking to the nuanced experiences of, say, for example, a queer woman who has a disability, who is also a woman of color and comes from a working class background. The support and the policies that you have for someone who doesn't fall in those categories is going to be different for that person. But oftentimes, because organizations, it's really difficult, right? Like, they want to create a really strong culture, but also we have to be profitable. Commercial success is super important. If we don't have a business that's thriving, then we can't actually have a workforce. So it's finding that balance. And I think oftentimes organizations are just looking for kind of that really quick and dirty policy that they can put in. But I think what we find is that, especially when it comes to women, by thinking in kind of that narrow monolithic framework, we end up kind of discounting other women that are navigating the corporate space. And while they're dealing with a lot of kind of that sexist discrimination, they're also dealing with a whole other level of discrimination as well. So according to a research, Black women represent less than 10% of senior roles in FTSE companies. And that's significantly less than their white female counterparts. And then even when thinking about kind of parity, pay parity, according to McKinsey's research, it takes 22 years for white women to reach pay parity. For women of color, that's more than twice as long. So I think when we think about these days, we tend to, again, think in an overarching way. But the experience of a white woman and the experience of a Black woman is completely different. And our policies and our kind of conversations don't get into that nitty gritty. And so I think if organizations want to have impactful conversations, impactful policies that really support all women, and not only getting into the workforce, moving up in the workforce, and then staying there, then it's really important we have those conversations about how, oh, I'm not really thinking about what it is to be a woman with a disability in a senior position. So if I have another woman who's a junior executive, how does she feel? Does she feel as though she has a path to getting to that position? And I think it's those questions that organizations need to think about. And it doesn't have to be all at the same time, right? I think Heather talked about all of the really fantastic policies that they have when thinking about maternity and paternity leave, when thinking about fertility support. I think, maybe taking it a step further is thinking about, okay, when it comes to fertility treatments, we know that women of color have higher mortality rates when it comes to having children. Are there additional supports, resources that we can connect them to, so that not only are we showing that we see them as women, but we see them as women of color who are dealing with other issues in addition to. So I think those questions can be really helpful in making sure that the policies, the initiatives that we're leading truly support women from all backgrounds versus just, a specific group.
Okay, thank you. And obviously we're here today discussing having this webinar because it's International Women's Day at the weekend, and we're marking that. But what role, Whitney, do you think these celebration days and months have in this new DE&I context?
Yeah, I think the intention was really great, right? Like, I think we wanted to highlight the disparities that women, people of color, those from, queer backgrounds experience. But I think what's ended up happening is that people are just like, oh, I'm going to do the effort, the work on this month, on this day, and then leave it. And it actually undermines all of the efforts. And it, I think, inherently has become a performative action or gesture. I think in order to really make it so that these moments, these panels, like that they truly are as impactful as we want them to be, is to recognize that, yes, we're having this panel session right now in March. What are we doing in April, in May, in June? What are the things that we're doing that aren't something that we can put on our socials, but are things that our employees are using and is actually helping them to overcome a lot of the obstacles? I think that, and I think part of the reason why we're seeing some D&I backlash is because it does feel as though a lot of organizations are just leaning on kind of those tick box things that aren't making a difference, instead of kind of focusing on like, what are the little initiatives internally that we don't talk about that are actually moving the needle. So I think it's really important that we look at these moments. They're really great. This panel is super fantastic, and I'm so excited to speak alongside all of these incredible women. But what are the things that we're doing outside of socials? What are the things we're doing outside of these months? So we're not just, picking this up once a year, because we're senior, women in business all year round. And we need that support all year round.
Absolutely. And we've talked about sort of employee representation groups. So coming to you, Angela, what do you think the role is of community groups and networks that can empower women?
I think they're hugely important. We've talked about the fact that it can be a really lonely place. And so I think there is strength in the number of women, take the PR and comms industry, in the depth of our collective experiences, and just knowing that there are women that are maybe walking or have walked a similar path and that you can connect with. I think we talked as well about trying to change some of the stereotypes that we're seeing, and these networks and communities are important part of being part of that change. And it's not just looking at sort of these community groups in isolation. So, I'm on the Women in PR committee. I'm also on the Asian Comms Network board. There is crossover between our groups. We have done events with Women in Public Affairs, which Lizzie chairs. So it's how we come together as well, to support women. Women in PR, we do that in 3 different ways. So as talked about, we've got our networking, trying to help bring together women to share sort of experiences and advice. And also just have a bit of fun because that's needed too. We try and sort of support with learning events. So that could be sort of navigating some of those issues that, we're all experiencing, but no one really talks about, whether that's the parenting juggle, redundancy, trying to go for that promotion, making the transition from in-house to agency or vice versa, talking about, women's health issues, burnout, and so on. And then there's the mentoring program, which is going into its 12th year this year, and it's fantastic in really making sure we're supporting that talent to come up through the pipeline and really kind of support our central mission, which is to get more women into senior leadership roles and increase the diversity of women in those senior leadership roles as well.
Absolutely. I mean, as a former president of Women PR, I really believe in the power of networking, and it's really good to see so many other networks that have sprung up across the industry so that everybody feels that they've got their place that they can go to for that support. We've got a question, so I'll just read it out to you, and then if one of you could indicate if you'd like to take it. How have you supported men in your workplaces and communities to drive better culture in terms of women in leadership, for example, through male allyship? So do any of you have any situations that you'd like to talk about in relation to that?
I'm happy
Heather.
to.
Okay, thank you.
So we've got, I've spoken about our employee resource groups, and I think something that I'm very passionate about and often very concerned about is, mental health within men and the sort of stigma around that. Suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 40, and I think that's pretty haunting. We have a mental health and wellbeing group, and we have excellent male representation across that group. And we've had a number of fireside chats, and men in our business have been brave enough to talk about their mental health and their well-being, and how they protect both, and when they have needed help, and how we can support both personally and professionally. So I think that's a real culture question, and making driving a business where a culture where men are safe to feel vulnerable. So I hope that we have that here. I also think that a lot of, and I've probably been guilty of this as well, when we think about policies, particularly family policies, that we immediately think about women in them. And I've really tried and consulted with men in our business, particularly men who have been brave enough to share with me when they are and their partners are having fertility struggles, or have suffered baby loss, or who having to support partners at home looking after very young children and babies, or even actually looking after, you know, teenagers having a hard time as well. So making sure that we have support within those policies. That's why our baby loss policy is for both men and women. You know, we've had, you know, obviously men within our business who have their partners have had miscarriages, and it just really struck me that, you know, it's often women who are able to have 2 or 3 weeks of work, and, you know, men are expected to come in the next day, and, you know, we need we need fairness across those policies. So yeah, but I think it's a really good question. It's something that I'm challenging myself on. Like Whitney, I'm, you know, a great believer in us marking these moments in International Women's Day. But I also do think, you know, I when it's I want to make sure we have a big focus on mental health and support for the men in our lives, and also the men that we work with as well.
Thank you, Heather.
I was just gonna,
Lizzie, did you want to come in on that?
yeah, no, I was just going to quickly add, because I think that was a fantastic answer from Heather, but and also, you know, they are women, and it's fantastic. But sometimes I'm thinking, are we preaching to the converted here? You know, we do need men to be attending our events as well. We do need men involved in our network. So we need to build those allyships as well as supporting the women in our network. So although it's women in public affairs, it's open to men as well.
Okay, thank you, Lizzie. I think we had a little bit of you going in and out of reception there, but we'll stick with it.
Oh, sorry.
That's not a problem. We're now going to sort of move on to our next theme, which is the sorts of challenges that are facing women in public affairs, which we know has been a more traditionally male-dominated area of public relations and corporate affairs. So Lizzie, obviously you are the chair of Women in Public Affairs, and I know a lot of your members are joining us today. What are the main barriers you believe are facing women in public affairs to achieve gender equality?
Yeah, thanks, Mary. I think for me personally, to start with, I would say female representation in the industry. So I think every individual will have their own experience of the barriers that they've faced. But so for me, we're seeing a lot of women perhaps at that lower level in public affairs. But if you think of the industry like a pyramid, as you go further up the pyramid, you're just seeing females disappear. And I think the point earlier about the role models, that those role models are disappearing as well. And I know that the CIPR are doing some research, I think an event tomorrow, on where are the missing women. So if they're all at the bottom, they're not at the top, where are they? So being forced out of the industry for other reasons as well. So I think addressing that is very important. And for me, I mean, when I first entered public affairs, I was one of 2 women on a team. But luckily, the senior men in the team knew that, you know, we needed a diverse team, and now I'm sort of 50% gender balance. So that's fantastic. So it is improving, but more does need to be done. At Whenman in Public Affairs, we've seen pay and pay transparency highlighted consistently as a barrier that are facing women in the industry. And then others I've speak to, they just identify that pressure to overperform. They always have to prove their worth. I think, as Angela said earlier, sort of always having to be that too much and really make an impact. And that imposter syndrome in meetings is still sort of impacting particularly junior women. And then because it's public affairs, that limited access to that network, that boys club, or, you know, are we getting invited to networking? Are we getting invited to meet the stakeholders that help enhance our career? But for me, I think just that representation overall just needs to be improved, and that will just start breaking down those barriers impacting women in the public affairs industry.
Yeah, and I'm delighted to say that this week the bank appointed a female senior director of public affairs who has joined us, and so it's great to have that representation in our organisation. So staying with you, Lizzie, Women in Public Affairs, you publish an annual survey, and can you tell us how it's used to amplify underrepresented voices within the industry?
Yeah, of course. So Whipper conducts an annual survey with Opinion. I think we are in our 7th year doing it now. So a little plug because the survey closed yesterday and we're launching the results and event next Thursday. And this year we're focusing more on flexible working and return to work. But it basically started because we just wanted to know more about what was happening in the industry, down to the little things like who is working in the industry, what ages, what gender, what race, where do they live in the UK, and then the challenges being faced by them. And as I mentioned earlier, pay disparity and pay transparency is just a consistent theme that is highlighted as sort of issues that people want to raise with us in our survey. So we focused on pay transparency in our survey last year, and the data found that 98% of women consider the publication of pay bands important to address gender-based disparities in public affairs. And then building on that, 48% believe that their pay has been influenced by gender, race, or age. And a third believe that there is a pay disparity between men and women. So it's really good data that we can just delve into and then think, okay, what are the solutions we can come up with? Because one of the issues that we find is that it is at the point of entry that pay disparity starts. So I can't remember who you said earlier, but I think it was you, Whitney, that women are being paid less than men over time. Their company publishers impact women, particularly at the start of their careers, because they are asking for less money. But we know that it's a challenge for employers. It's not easy. It's not easy just to publish your pay band. There are different challenges that are impacting employers. So we're going to start working with them to try and find solutions to this problem and address pay transparency and pay disparity in the workplace.
Thank you, Lizzie. I know that others in this webinar, you also are responsible for public affairs functions, either in-house or in agency. Did you have anything to add with respect to this particular area of the industry before we move on to our next subject?
No, I think Lizzie's covered it well.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So moving on about how can we actually bring about policy change? Moving to you, Angela, how can strategic communications and engagement amplify underrepresented voices, and how can it challenge bias and advocate for policies that support women's rights?
Thanks, Mary. I mean, we're all in this business because we believe in the power of communications to help really deliver change. But I think when we're doing that, we need to make sure that if we are communicating about issues that affect women or are directed at women, we need to make sure that their experiences are front and center in how we design those campaigns and tell those stories, so that we are communicating in a way that meaningfully resonates with them and can deliver that change. I'm going to talk through an example. So a couple of years ago, well, we've done quite a lot at the ICO on women's privacy, and a couple of years ago, we launched an investigation into how rape and serious sexual assault cases were being handled. And what we found, that when these cases were being reported, obviously rape, affects men and women, but largely women. When these cases were being reported, survivors were being asked by police forces to just sign a piece of form that required them to hand over all their personal information. So medical records, social media history, school reports, iPhones, laptops, the works, just to get their case taken forward. And this was in breach of the law. But rather than talking about what the law allows and what it doesn't allow, we wanted to make sure we told the story in a way that actually reflected the experiences of the survivors of rape and serious sexual assault. And so the communications campaign that we put out was centered around a report called Who's Under Investigation? And that really reflected the fact that so many women felt that in seeking justice for the horrific trauma that they'd been through, they were the ones being subjected to being put in the spotlight. They were being subjected to a digital strip search. They were being re-victimized just because they wanted to bring their case forward. And we already know that rape convictions are horrifically low. But that was so important. Telling that story in that way was the only way that we could really make sure that we cut through in terms of what our expectations were from police forces, and also making sure that women who wanted to take forward their case really understood what their rights were and what they could and should expect when they were going to report what had happened to them. And I think being able to talk about it in that way really resonated with the group that we were trying to target, and it had really great support from the Victims Commissioner, Women's Aid, Rape Crisis, who we partnered with actually to make sure that we were telling those stories in a way that really meant something to survivors of rape. And actually, we had some really powerful feedback to say that for the first time, lots of these survivors felt properly seen and heard, because it was talking about not just technicalities of the law, but actually what they had been through.
Thank you for that, Angela. And I think in your role at the Information Commissioner's Office, you're in an incredibly powerful position to bring about some of these changes that we all need to see for the benefit of women and girls. So thank you for that example. Moving to you, Heather, what changes would you like to see in policy in relation to women and girls?
Yeah, difficult to follow that incredibly powerful case study, Angela. Amazing work. You should be so proud of that. Really quite shocking, isn't it? But I think the biggest, and this sounds like quite a simple thing to say, but I just think this would change the whole industry. Is I've worked at several global organisations now, and many of them have got really good paternity leaves, but I have often seen men not taking their full paternity leaves, not feeling able to take their full paternity leaves, which shows you how vulnerable people feel in those moments, how vulnerable you feel as a woman going on maternity leave, that men can't take short paternity leaves because they feel like it will disrupt their progression and their career, and so they end up not taking their full paternity leaves. Or they will chunk it, so they'll do month here, month there, etc., which actually can work very well in terms of the family life, but actually can probably be more disruptive to the workplace. But I think that if we started moving towards, I would love a world where we start moving towards having same maternity and paternity policies, and I hope that we can get our agency there, and for men and women to have the same amount of time out of work. And I think that we're a way to go on this, but that would be transformational. When I'm doing like Lizzie's talked about, when I'm reviewing pay gap data or pay band data, whichever agency I've been in, and this is really hard to avoid unless you continue to treat people who are on maternity and paternity equally as the people in the business, you see women's career and pay suffer because they have had sometimes 6 months out of business, 9 months out of business, a year out of business. And actually, then therefore we have gaps in pay because men don't suffer in the same way because they haven't had to have the same gaps in their career and out of the workplace. So I think if we started moving to a more equal approach in terms of the maternity and paternity leave, I think it would make women feel much less vulnerable. I think it would help men probably protect their mental health well-being, for more connected to their families and children, and be able to be better partners and role models within the family, but also within business. So I think that's definitely a stretch goal, but I can just see that that's probably our biggest blocker in terms of us having true equity within the business, within male and female leadership, certainly.
Thank you, Heather. And Lizzie, what plans do Women in Public Affairs have for the next year to drive meaningful change for gender equality?
Thank you. Yeah, we've got quite a lot planned. So just for context, last year we had 24 events in the 12 months of the year. So hopefully as ambitious an events program as last year. But we also want to find bigger events for more of our members to join. So if anyone's listening and they've got a big event space, please do get in touch. We'd like to use it. One of the things that we've also been doing is campaigning for pay and transparency, as I mentioned earlier. So last year we launched a pay and transparency toolkit. And then within that, we're launching a series of guides to help people help address the issue that we're finding consistently in our surveys. So last year we launched a pay negotiation guide. So that's a guide for our employers, a guide for members, which provides sort of tips on how to evidence your value, researching industry salary bands, helping people set their goals, and practicing your pitch. Later this year, hopefully before the summer, we want to publish an employer's guide. And that's working with employers to help them get to the point where they can potentially publish their salary bands. And I think as Heather has highlighted, it's not easy, and it's not something that's just going to click your fingers and we can fix it overnight. So we're having some very constructive discussions with employers about how we can get to that point. And we don't want to produce a guide which is very aspirational and someone reads and goes, that's really nice, it's not doable, I'm going to throw it away. So we want to get to a point where it's actually quite practical and helps people to get to those steps where we can have more pay transparency there. And then at the end of the year, hopefully a flexible working and return to work guide, and that will feed into this toolkit to help address pay disparity and transparency in public affairs.
Great, thanks, Lizzie. And we've had a fantastic question in. In light of what's going on in the United States, have you seen clients ask you to row back or press pause on DE&I linked campaigns? So as we've got a few people in agency here, Heather, Whitney and Lizzie, would you like to, one of you or a few of you, like to take that, and what's your experience?
Yeah, to be completely honest with you, we have, and you know, not in terms of, you know, huge change.
Heather's just frozen for me. So whilst we wait for Heather to come back, could we go to you, Whitney?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so with the clients that I've worked with, they haven't rolled it back, but I think there's been a reframing in D&I. And I think it kind of just speaks to how important like our, PR work is. Like, I think D&I has a PR problem. And I think what I'm finding with my organizations is that the ones that are genuinely committed to this work recognize that whether, an acronym is done away with or not, the work of trying to bring in talent across the board is super important. The work of trying to keep talent is really important. So I think it's about a reshift and a broadening of how we think about D&I. So, for example, with a health charity that I work with, it's thinking about inclusive language and how we talk about different backgrounds. So how are we making sure that we are talking to people who are from Gen Z and like giving them the tools to communicate with older generations? How are we thinking about the language and accessibility for people who have a disability? Are we making sure that like we're not using antiquated language that's actually dismissive of people that are have different disabilities? And I think, again, it's even thinking about how we frame, women and men. So I think a lot of the times in our vernacular, there's a lot of kind of coded, gendered language that even we as women, we adopt because that's what society has done. And so we're just thinking about that, whether or not D&I, what's happening in the States, my client recognizes that these conversations, these questions are super important because their employees are really adamant about making sure that we are in a workplace where everyone feels as though they're being spoken to, they're feeling valued, and they're feeling respected. So that's kind of my perspective in terms of my clients and how they're reacting to what's happening in the States. I'm not sure if Heather's back.
Heather's back. Heather,
Yeah.
we went
Sorry,
to Whitney.
my laptop died at a fairly key moment. I don't feel like I got a warning. I'm so sorry.
So Whitney was talking about reframing D&I and what she's experiencing. So you were just about to tell us that you have actually experienced, and I'm just aware we've got 5 minutes of the webinar left. You were just about to tell us about your experience of clients rowing back on DE&I.
Yeah, and I would say this isn't widespread at all, and we possibly feel it more being a global agency, and you obviously reference the situation in the States. I certainly haven't had any direction to pause on this campaign or we're changing this. It has been a sort of press pause, or let's delete this paragraph off the bottom of a press release, you know, that kind of subtle changes, which, you know, if you told me that was going to be happening a year or two ago, I would have been quite shocked. And I think it's, you know, it's pretty devastating, to be honest. I think all that, you know, we can do, and all the, you know, I'm focused on doing it as a business, is that, you know, my focus will always continue to be on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I have started referring to it as a diversity in terms of thought and experience. You only have to list off our clients as an agency. You know, I'll take, you know, our clients being Birmingham, you know, Football Club, Grindr, HSBC, you know, the list could go on. Of course, I need a diverse workforce to work on those clients. How could I have a one size fits all to work across those brands? And, you know, that's absolutely bonkers. So, you know, I need I need different lived experience. I need different ages. I need different ethnicities. I need different socioeconomic statuses to be able to connect with consumers and the audiences of those clients. So, you know, if I row back on my commitment to us having a diverse workforce in terms of, you know, thought, experience, and approach, then I will not be successful to deliver for my clients. So, you know, I think it's actually, you know, made me even more determined in order to continue in the way that we are. But yeah, we are seeing changes, aren't we, in terms of the way this is being debated across our industry and our clients. There is no denying that.
Okay, thank you for that, Heather. I want to give all of you the opportunity to end hopefully on a positive note, and to have one final say. So we've got 2 minutes left. And I'm just going to ask each of you the same question, and I'm going to come to you first, Angela. What's your best piece of advice for women navigating our industry?
Best piece of advice. Ask for help and don't strive for perfection. Like it's not real. Let's just keep it honest. We're all in this together. We're all trying to fight the good fight, and just keep supporting each other, because that, you know, if we can work together, we can channel our energy into fighting, I think, the systems and the narratives that are holding us back. There's definitely strength in numbers. Thank you. And Heather?
Yeah, I think my bit of advice is probably quite personal advice, and certainly my experience. And, you know, I am speaking to one sort of demographic perhaps here, but I started openly challenging these notion when I hear of people, you know, baby brain and, you know, losing their marbles when they come back to work after children, etc., etc. You know, there is a world where we can be more powerful, more efficient, more determined, and more ambitious when we come back from having children. I felt like I found my purpose in, you know, life personally and professionally after that, and certainly became much better at my job. I think I just used to sort of wander around the office having chit chats until 6 p.m. and then start doing my work before, you know. So I think for us to be empowered at this stage of our life, which is frightening, and you do feel very vulnerable, but for us to just change the narrative on it, because the narrative is so negative and it doesn't have to be.
Thank you. So Whitney, your top tip piece of advice for women navigating the industry before we go to Lizzie and close.
Yeah, I think it's fairly similar to Angela, but I think it's finding a community. I think, as Angela said, strength in numbers is so important. And for those where community might be a bit more difficult to find, like, you know, create a community. I think there are so many different experiences out there. And if you feel as though your experience isn't reflected or represented, then create that community, because I'm certain that there are other people who share those thoughts and feelings and are just looking for other folks to connect with too. So, yeah, find your community, but when in doubt, also create one if you need to.
Great, thank you. And Lizzie?
Mine would be yourself and be your own leader. You don't need to mimic aggressive leadership styles that's not natural for you or anything like that. And you're not too much and too little, as Angela was saying earlier. I think your best work shines through when you are yourself, and your personality comes through in your work as well. So yeah, that's mine.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to thank our 4 fantastic panelists today. So Angela Balakrishnan, Heather Blundell, Whitney Simon, and Lizzie Tomlin. Thank you for joining us on the PRCA's International Women's Day 2025 webinar. And I hope everybody enjoyed it. Thank you for your questions and have a good day. Bye.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, everyone.